If you're still at school or currently studying, I'm sure you want to get good grades. And there are many people who study like 3 hours a day for an exam and then get an F. But there are also people who just learn 20 minutes for an exam and then get an A. In this video, you are going to learn how to become this person. I'm also going to show you how you can optimize the time you invest in learning. So the quantity of time you need to invest is as low as possible, and the quality, so the learning success, is as high as possible. So you will get a good grade in the class test. Okay, chapter 1, I think you already know this. Always listen. And you probably know roughly why you should always listen. But let me explain why it is so important. You don't want to be like this guy. While the teacher is explaining something, he doesn't listen and is quasi sleeping. And at home, when he has to learn for a class test, he needs to learn for several hours because he has learned nothing in the lessons. Imagine you sit for 8 hours in the school and then come home and learn for another 3 hours. If you just listen in the lessons, you will save a lot of time. You have to learn to value your time. You have to spend time at school anyway. But if you waste the time, you will automatically need to spend more time at home, even though you should spend the time outside of school with something better. And through not listening, you won't only lose time, but this guy will definitely have a worse learned quality than this guy, provided he listens, of course. If you listen to a teacher who's really teaching it to you, you will definitely understand everything much better than if you're just reading through some notes, where you probably can't even remember what was explained to you there. And I'm sure you can't learn something just by reading through some notes if the teacher needs 1 hour to explain that to you. It's definitely very important that you listen. That's not a tip or something like that. It's a prerequisite. Otherwise, you will most likely not get a good grade. And this is actually the secret of the people who never learn and even though gets good grades. They simply listen in class. Furthermore, you can ask questions in a class. So you don't understand something and you can simply ask a question and then you hopefully understand it. But this guy, of course, can't ask questions because he learns at home and hopefully there's no teacher at his home. Okay, so at my school, at the beginning of the year, they always tell us how much the written grade counts towards the oral grade. And that was usually either 2-1 or sometimes also 1-1 or 3-1. But that one, that's your oral grade. So if the teacher announces 2-1, that means 1/3 of your grade is just the oral grade. And this oral grade is, first of all, very underestimated, but your oral grade is also very easy to improve. And you should also make an effort for this grade. Okay, so what does that look like in concrete terms? Many of you have probably already thought, I do not have a smile on my face because I understand everything the teacher tells me. No, I'm sad because I don't understand anything. And they have like this mindset, I don't understand anything, so it's not my fault that my oral grade is bad. And that's of course like the worst mindset you could have. If you don't understand anything, you can of course ask the teacher. And most teachers also give a better oral grade for questions because it shows you are interested in that subject, or that you at least have interest in understanding what the teacher is telling you. And it also shows that you participate in the subject, and often it also advances the lesson. Of course, there are also teachers who see questions as a learning gap and make the oral grade because of that worse. In that case, I would recommend you to learn at home for yourself, not for an exam, but to understand the topic you are currently doing in the school. And of course, the chapters in this video are connected with each other, because if you listen in the class, you will also be able to say more because you know more. So you get a better oral grade. But not only your oral grade will improve, but also your written grade. So everything is connected to each other. And if you're wrong, you won't repeat that mistake ever again. Just always listen and raise your hand as often as possible. And if you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in class. Okay, so this is probably the most important chapter in this video. You've learned so far very basic things like improving your oral grade or always listening. In chapter 3 you are going to learn more advanced things that not everyone knows. The name of chapter 3 is Learning Methods. I want to introduce to you two people. This is Tom. Tom learns like most people. Like for example, reading through his notes, maybe he writes down some summaries and so on. He learns simply like the mainstream. And then comes the class test. And suddenly he doesn't know anything anymore. He has a blackout and he gets an F. He has learned for 2 weeks, 3 hours per day, and it all was for nothing. But there's another guy named Lars, and I put a question mark here because he uses a weird learning method. He started learning only 1 week before the class test and learned for only 20 minutes per day and has received an A. And he not only got a better grade, he also saved a lot of time. And time is the most valuable thing you have. And so he could use this time for other things, like for example having fun, doing sports, or being productive in other ways. But what did he do? In the following I am going to show you the most important learning principles and what learning methods you should use and which one you should not use. Okay, so the first learning principle is active recall. And for this I want to show you the difference between learning passively and learning actively. And active learning is the type of learning you should prefer. An example for learning passively is reading a book. Learning actively means to actively deal with the material and to write everything down you know about that. This is active learning because you are actively using your brain and use the information you have. And after you've written everything down you know, you pick the solutions and fill in what you didn't know. For active learning, most of the time, passive learning is also necessary, but you should learn as actively as possible. So you should always implement active learning also and never only do passive learning. The second learning principle I want to share with you is spaced repetition. I want to show you the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. In simplified terms, it looks like this. You can see here at the top, it is very steep and then it flattens. This is the curve that shows you how fast you forget things. If you learn something here and know it 100%, after a few days you will lose that knowledge very fast. But the loss of knowledge in this area is larger than in this area, even though both areas have the same size. Of course, we don't want that this happens, so we repeat the knowledge over and over again. So I set the line at around 90%, and in this area I want to stay with my knowledge. Now imagine you are at 100% because you have learned it. After a few days you are at 90% and your knowledge goes up to 100%. But that pattern does not stay the same over and over and over and over again. The distance gets larger. So if you have learned something new, the interval at which you must repeat it is growing. So for example, you learn something on this day, and then you repeat it on that day, but this interval grows over time. And at some point you may have to repeat it again in a year. So these are the important learning principles you should use for learning, especially active recall, but spaced repetition is also very important for things you always need to know. Okay, so how to use them, that's the chapter 3.4. In this chapter I show you how to not use them. The first learning method is, of course, just reading through your notes. Absolutely not active, because you only read and give your brain the information only passively, just as marking. Of course, spaced repetition is also not existent with these learning methods, except you read through notes, for example, in an increasingly larger interval. In any case, are these learning methods that everyone uses absolutely not active but passive, and that should of course be avoided. So the first learning method I would recommend you is using the app called Anki. Anki is an app you can simply download in the Play Store or in the App Store. It combines the learning principles active recall and spaced repetition. And Anki is a flashcard app. You can simply enter a front side and a back side, and then you see the front side, and then you have to think what will be the back side. And then you click on show answer, and then you see the answer. And if you didn't know the answer at all, it will be shown to you at the same day in like a minute. And maybe it occurred to you right away, or maybe you needed a few seconds or even minutes to get the answer. And dependent on that, the card will be shown to you in 1 day or 3 days or 5 days and so on. And a few days later, you will see the card again, and then maybe 1 week later, and then 3 weeks later, and so on. Just download the app and watch a YouTube tutorial or something like that, and use it every day. Okay, so Anki is something you need to do every day. You simply do that without having to study for class test. But I want to show you another learning method that you can use for studying for a class test. And I mentioned it briefly earlier, but I want to show it to you again. The learning method is called blurting, and it is an active learning method. So you start with a passive learning method by, for example, reading through your notes, and then you put away your notes and then write everything down you remember. And if you don't know anything anymore, you grab a red pencil and correct it. So you correct what was wrong or what you have forgotten. And it's best to repeat it until you don't need to correct anything anymore. There are many people who write summaries, and this is of course not good. It's simply a time waste. But what is still acceptable is to rewrite the notes in your own words, because this is also a little bit active, because you are actively dealing with your notes. But I would rather avoid it. But I personally use this learning method sometimes. For learning vocabulary, you can simply cover one side, so either the foreign language or your native language, and then you think about what is the word. In this chapter you will learn about planning. Planning is important for every type of productivity. Yeah, that's a self-improvement channel, and of course every type of productivity is important, not only for school. Let's assume your class test has a learning effort of 5 hours, and then you can of course study for 5 hours in just 1 day, but you can also divide these 5 hours into 5 days, and you can also divide them up in, for example, 10 days. Then you have to learn for 30 minutes per day, and so on. But what you should never do under any circumstances is to study 1 day before the class test, because the day before the class test is the revision day. And if the class test is, for example, on Wednesday, Thursday is fixed as the revision day, and the days before the revision day you do, for example, 1 topic per day, and then you do every day a little bit, for example 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour. That's way better than doing everything on 1 day. And I personally would try to use the day on which I plan everything for the class test, not to use for learning, because I want to stay up every day with the knowledge of everything I have to do today. And if my plan is full already, then I don't want to have any more to do. You should also try to learn for any class test the same time per day. And if the total learning effort is, for example, 90 minutes, then you have to learn 3 days. And with the revision day, 4 days. And if the total learning effort are 5 hours, you need to learn for 10 days. And with the revision day, 11 days. So you should align the days with the learning effort and not the time you use for learning per day. In the last chapter of this video, we learn a very important difference. With the things you have learned in this video, you might get very good in, for example, history or languages. But what about, for example, arts or PE or things you simply have to understand? For this you have to practice, because there's a difference between learning and practicing. This vocabulary you can simply learn. You can, for example, cover this up and then you see water and then you think, okay, water in German is Wasser, and then you can uncover it and see, okay, I was correct. And the same for the other side. But practicing is even more active. While practicing, you actually do the thing. So if you, for example, have to write an essay, you can of course learn words like furthermore or nevertheless, or you can learn the structure of your essay. But that way you won't really get anywhere. But what you should do instead is to simply write. And then you can give the essay to a teacher, or you can make a photo of your essay and send it to ChatGPT or find any other way. And this way you can also improve in, for example, art or PE by simply practicing. So if you're, for example, bad at sprinting, simply sprint and get better and better every day or every week. And you can't really learn math either, because you have to understand it. Okay, in this video I have shown you the most important things to get better at school. But of course it won't do you any good if you don't do the things I have shown you in this video. So if you have liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to my channel.